We arrived at the campsite on the evening of May 4th, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The air was crisp. As we set up our tents, the atmosphere was filled with laughter and the crackling of the campfire. Everything felt perfect until my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a missed call from an unknown number, but I thought nothing of it. The breeze suddenly picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that made the forest seem alive, watching. As the night wore on, the woods grew darker. The missed call lingered in my mind, a small but nagging discomfort. I glanced at my phone again, hoping it wouldn't ring, but it remained silent. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. My heart raced every time a twig snapped or a leaf crunched underfoot, though I tried to brush it off as the usual noises of the forest. When the suggestion to explore the nearby abandoned cabin came up, I hesitated. The thought of venturing into the dark woods made my stomach churn, but I didn't want to be the one to spoil the fun. We grabbed our flashlights and set out, the beams cutting through the thick darkness like knives. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the air became, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else I couldn't place. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it. Another missed call from the same number. The cabin stood in a small clearing, its weathered walls barely holding together under the weight of years of neglect. It was smaller than I imagined, with a roof that seemed ready to cave in at any moment. As we stepped inside, the musty smell of rot and decay hit us like a wave. Dust floated in the beams of our flashlights, creating a thick haze. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed yet again, and my pulse quickened. We heard it then. A faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably real. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, and it was coming from just outside the cabin. My friends exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. I wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of the campfire, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and the shadow of something moved just beyond the threshold of the door. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that whatever was out there had been waiting for us all along. The whispering outside the cabin grew louder, almost as if whatever was out there was drawing closer. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, and I could see the same fear reflected in their eyes that was gnawing at my insides. One of them suggested we should leave, but before anyone could move, my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another missed call from the same unknown number. My hands trembled as I stared at it, the air around us thickening with tension. Something was wrong, deeply, unsettlingly wrong. We decided to step outside, hoping that being in the open would ease the growing sense of dread. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the night seemed to close in around us. The forest was unnaturally silent, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your skin crawl. Our flashlights flickered, struggling to penetrate the darkness that felt heavier than before. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see a figure lurking just out of sight. Then out of nowhere, we heard it, the crunch of leaves underfoot, slow and deliberate. The sound was too close, much too close. My breath caught as I swung my flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam landed on nothing but empty space, yet the sense of being watched only intensified. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly screamed. Another missed call. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I wanted to shout, to demand that whatever was out there show itself. But fear had sealed my lips shut. We huddled together, trying to make sense of what was happening. One of my friends suggested it was just a prank, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, we all knew this was no ordinary scare. The whispers started up again, louder this time, as if whatever was speaking wanted to be heard. The sound sent chills racing down my spine. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Panic clawed at my insides, but I forced myself to stay calm. We had to get back to the campsite, back to the safety of the fire. As we made our way back through the woods, the darkness seemed to close in even more, pressing against us from all sides. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. My phone buzzed repeatedly now, each vibration echoing in the silence like a death knell. I didn't dare look at the screen anymore, afraid of what I might see. We stumbled through the underbrush, our footsteps hurried and frantic. The whispers followed us, growing louder, almost desperate, as if begging us not to leave. When we finally broke through the tree line and saw the glow of the campfire, relief washed over us. We ran the last few yards, collapsing around the fire, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The warmth of the flames felt like a lifeline, chasing away the cold that had seeped into our bones. For a moment, I thought we were safe, that the nightmare was over. But then, my phone buzzed again. I couldn't ignore it any longer. With trembling hands, I unlocked the screen, dreading what I might find. The missed call was there, but this time there was a voicemail. With shaky hands, I pressed play on the voicemail, dreading what I might hear. The voice that came through the speaker was distorted, garbled, as if it was struggling to be understood through layers of static. But beneath the interference, I could make out words, fragmented, disjointed sentences that made my blood run cold. Don't go back to the cabin. She's watching. My heart pounded in my chest as the message repeated, the same words over and over, growing more frantic each time. I looked around at my friends, their faces pale and tense in the firelight. They had heard it too. The weight of the message pressed down on us, thick, with an ominous warning we couldn't ignore. But who was she? And why was she watching us? The questions buzzed in my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to voice them. The forest, which had once seemed so inviting, now felt like it was closing in on us. The trees like dark sentinels hiding something malevolent. That night, sleep was impossible. We all stayed close to the fire, its warmth the only comfort against the encroaching cold. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves made us jump. The whispering had stopped, but the silence was even worse, filled with an expectant tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My phone remained eerily silent too, the string of missed calls and the voicemail hanging over me like a curse. I wanted to turn it off, to throw it into the woods, but something kept me from doing so, as if breaking the connection would make everything worse. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, we felt a slight easing of the tension, but not enough to dispel the fear that clung to us. My friends and I decided to leave the campsite, agreeing that whatever was out there wasn't worth finding out. But as we packed up our gear, a part of me felt drawn back to the cabin, like an invisible thread was pulling me towards it. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts, the events of the night weighing heavily on our minds. But even as the miles stretched between us and the campsite, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed us. My phone buzzed again, making me jump. I stared at the screen, heart in my throat. Another missed call, this time with a new voicemail. I didn't want to listen, but I knew I had to. My finger hovered over the play button, dreading what I might hear. The voice on the other end was clearer this time, the words sharp and full of urgency. "You're not safe. She's coming. You have to go back. Find the truth." The line went dead, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. My hands were trembling, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was out there, and it wasn't going to stop until it had me. As much as I wanted to run, to forget everything that had happened, I knew there was no escaping it. I had to go back to the cabin, and this time, I wouldn't be leaving until I found out who, or what, was watching us. The drive back to the campsite felt like a journey into a nightmare. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the road, and as we drew closer, the sense of dread deepened. My friends had tried to talk me out of returning, but something inside me, something I couldn't explain, pushed me forward. I needed answers, and I knew the only place to find them was back at that cursed cabin. When we arrived, the campsite was eerily quiet. The forest, which had been full of life just a day before, now seemed dead, as if it was holding its breath. I hesitated for a moment, standing on the edge of the clearing, the cabin barely visible through the trees. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I knew without looking that it was another missed call. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but I forced myself to take a step forward, then another, until I was standing in front of the cabin once again. The door creaked open as I pushed it, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the cabin was just as we had left it, but the atmosphere was different, thicker, more oppressive. The strange markings on the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, drawing my eyes to them despite my fear. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I pressed play on the voicemail, bracing myself for the voice that had been haunting me. "You're close. So close. Don't stop now." The voice was almost a whisper, but it was clear, and it sent shivers down my spine. I felt a cold draft brush against my neck, and I spun around, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind me. But the cabin was empty, just as it had been before. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. There was something here, something that wanted me to find it, and I was determined to see this through. As I moved deeper into the cabin, I noticed a trapdoor hidden beneath a tattered rug in the corner. My heart pounded in my chest as I knelt down, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. With trembling hands, I lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. I hesitated, fear clawing at my insides, but the voice from the voicemail echoed in my mind, urging me forward. I descended the stairs slowly, each step taking me deeper into the unknown. The walls were close, the space cramped and suffocating. My flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. As I reached the bottom, the space opened up into a small, dank cellar. The walls were lined with old shelves, cluttered with dusty, forgotten objects. In the center of the room was a single, worn-out chair, facing an old television set that flickered with static. On the chair sat an old, battered phone, the screen cracked and covered in dust. My heart skipped a beat as I approached it, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. This was the phone, the one that had been calling me. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold, hard plastic. As soon as I touched it, the television flickered, the static clearing to reveal a grainy image of a young girl, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She was mouthing words, her voice barely audible through the speakers. "Help me. Find me. She's coming." Before I could react, the phone in my hand buzzed violently, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. My blood turned to ice as I saw the name on the screen, Sarah Vale. It was my name. I dropped the phone in shock, the call still ringing in the silence. The girl on the screen stared at me, her eyes pleading, and I knew then that this was the truth I had been searching for. This girl, whoever she was connected to me in some way, and she was trying to warn me. The room began to spin, the walls closing in as the television flickered and the image of the girl began to distort, her face twisting into something grotesque and unrecognizable. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, but there was no escape. The phone continued to ring, louder and more insistent, until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed it, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and pressed the answer button. The voice that came through was not the girl's, but something older, colder. "You've come so far, but you can't save her. She's mine now, just like you will be." The line went dead, and the silence that followed was deafening. I dropped the phone, my heart racing, and backed away towards the stairs. I had to get out, had to leave before it was too late. But as I turned to flee, the cellar door slammed shut above me, plunging me into darkness. The darkness in the cellar was suffocating, pressing in from all sides like a living entity. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I switched it on, the beam flickered weakly before dying completely. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back toward the stairs, desperate to escape. My hands found the cold, rough surface of the wooden steps, but the trapdoor above remained stubbornly shut, trapping me in the pitch-black abyss. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of my heart. I pressed my ear to the trapdoor, hoping to hear something, anything, that would indicate someone was outside, but there was nothing. The sense of isolation was terrifying, as if I had been cut off from the world entirely. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who was the girl on the screen? And why did she have my name? The voice on the phone, what did it want from me? Suddenly, the television in the corner crackled to life again, the static filling the room with an eerie glow. The same girl appeared on the screen, but this time, her face was twisted in terror, her eyes wide with fear. She reached out towards the camera as if trying to break through the screen and reach me. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the static. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized that whatever was haunting this place was connected to her and to me. As I watched, the girl's image began to distort, her features melting away into a dark, swirling mass. The static on the screen grew louder, filling the room with a deafening roar. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The cellar felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, suffocating me. My vision blurred as the darkness pressed against my eyes, and I stumbled back against the shelves, sending dusty objects clattering to the floor. In the chaos, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I grabbed it instinctively, pulling it from the debris. It was an old key, tarnished and heavy, with strange markings etched into the surface. My heart leapt as I realized this could be my way out. I turned back towards the stairs, but the trapdoor was gone, replaced by a solid wall of darkness. Panic gripped me as I tried to find an exit, but the room seemed to have shifted, the walls now smooth and unyielding. The key grew warm in my hand, almost burning, and I could feel a pull, like an invisible force guiding me towards something. My feet moved on their own, leading me to the far corner of the room where a small, iron-bound door had appeared. It was old and weathered, the wood splintered and cracked, but the lock was intact. With trembling hands, I inserted the key, turning it slowly. The lock clicked open with a loud, echoing sound, and the door creaked ajar, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. The air that wafted from the tunnel was cold and musty, carrying the scent of earth and decay. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but there was no other choice. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open wider and stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for a moment, I was completely disoriented, the ground shifting beneath my feet. But then, I felt it, a presence, close and oppressive, moving through the tunnel with me. I quickened my pace, the tunnel seeming to stretch on endlessly. The whispers started again, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. They were all around me, pressing in, echoing off the walls. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation, fear, and a malevolent hunger. I broke into a run, the walls of the tunnel closing in on me, the whispers now a cacophony in my ears. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the tunnel opened up into a large, circular chamber. In the center was a stone altar, and on it lay the girl from the screen, her eyes closed, her face peaceful. But I knew it was an illusion. There was nothing peaceful about this place. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and I realized with horror that they were coming from the walls themselves, faces forming in the stone, watching me with hollow, empty eyes. The key in my hand grew unbearably hot, and I dropped it to the floor, where it clattered loudly against the stone. The girl's eyes snapped open, locking onto mine, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of recognition, as if she knew me. "You can't save me," she whispered, her voice carrying a deep sadness. "But you can stop her." Before I could respond, the chamber began to shake, the walls cracking, and the faces in the stone screaming in unison. The ground gave way beneath me, and I fell into darkness, the girl's final words echoing in my mind. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in my body. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the campsite, the early morning light filtering through the trees. The air was warm and filled with the sounds of birds chirping. My friends were there, unharmed, packing up the last of our gear as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had. My phone was in my hand, the screen cracked and covered in dirt. There were no missed calls, no voicemails, but the memory of what I had seen, what I had experienced, was burned into my mind. As we drove away from the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that the darkness I had faced would follow me waiting for the right moment to return. And as we left the forest behind, I glanced at my phone one last time. There, in the reflection of the cracked screen, I saw her, just for a split second, the girl with the haunted eyes, watching me from the shadows. I knew then that she was still out there, and so was the thing that had taken her. But for now, at least, I was safe. It was October 14th, and the chill in the air was sharper than usual. Jason led the group of campers deeper into the woods, the fallen leaves crunching underfoot. The forest was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made your skin prickle. As they reached the campsite, Jason's phone buzzed with a missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He dismissed it as a wrong number, but the unease settled in, heavy and unshakable. That night, the group gathered around the campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. Jason couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. The missed call lingered in his mind, a tiny thread of fear pulling at the edges of his thoughts. The wind picked up, causing the flames to dance wildly, and Jason thought he saw something move in the darkness beyond the firelight. His heart skipped a beat, but when he looked again, there was nothing. As the night wore on, Jason found himself unable to relax. Every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig set his nerves on edge. He kept checking his phone, half expecting another call, but the screen remained dark. The group decided to turn in for the night, the fire slowly dying as they retreated to their tents. Jason lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest, his mind racing with possibilities. The silence pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. Around midnight, Jason's phone buzzed again, the sound jarring in the quiet night. He grabbed it quickly, his hands shaking slightly. Another missed call from the same number. A chill ran down his spine as he stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. He knew he should ignore it, but the temptation to call back was overwhelming. Before he could decide, he heard something outside his tent, a soft, steady tapping, like fingers drumming on the fabric. His heart pounded as he lay frozen, listening. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving Jason in a tense silence. He forced himself to sit up, his eyes darting around the tent, searching for shadows that didn't belong. Gathering his courage, he unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The camp was still, the fire reduced to glowing embers. But just beyond the edge of the campsite, he saw it. A figure standing perfectly still in the darkness, watching him. His breath caught as the figure slowly raised a hand, beckoning him closer. Jason's heart raced as he stared at the figure, its hand still beckoning him. The air around him seemed to freeze, the silence growing more oppressive with each passing second. He wanted to call out, to wake his friends, but something about the figure's stillness kept him rooted in place. Slowly, the figure began to back away, retreating into the shadows of the forest. Without thinking, Jason unzipped his tent further and stepped out, compelled to follow. The night was eerily quiet as Jason moved towards the edge of the campsite, his footsteps barely making a sound on the soft earth. The figure was just ahead, always staying just out of reach, its form blending seamlessly with the dark trees. Jason's mind screamed at him to turn back, but his body moved on its own, driven by a strange force he couldn't resist. The deeper he went into the woods, the colder it became, the trees closing in around him like silent witnesses. After what felt like hours, the figure suddenly stopped, standing motionless at the base of an ancient, gnarled tree. Jason hesitated, a deep sense of dread settling over him. The figure slowly raised its head, revealing a face shrouded in shadow, its features impossible to discern. Jason's breath hitched as he felt the air grow colder, a sharp, unnatural chill that cut through his clothing and made his skin prickle. The figure pointed to something on the ground, a small, weathered phone lying among the roots. Jason's hands trembled as he bent down to pick up the phone, his mind racing with questions. The device was old, the screen cracked and dirty, but it buzzed to life as soon as it touched his skin. The screen lit up, displaying a single missed call from an unknown number. Jason's blood ran cold as he realized it was the same number that had been calling him all night. The figure remained silent, its gaze fixed on Jason, waiting for him to act. Against his better judgment, Jason answered the call. The voice on the other end was a whisper, barely audible, but it was clear enough to send a jolt of fear through him. "Don't look back. Keep walking. They're watching you." The line went dead, leaving Jason in stunned silence. He looked up, but the figure was gone, leaving him alone in the dark woods. Panic surged through him as he realized he was lost, far from the safety of the campsite. The only sound was his own breathing, loud and ragged in the stillness. Desperate to find his way back, Jason turned to retrace his steps. But as soon as he did, the air grew thick with the sound of whispers, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Jason broke into a run, the whispers growing louder as if urging him to flee. But no matter how fast he ran, the darkness pursued him, pulling him deeper into the forest's grip. Jason's lungs burned as he ran, the forest a blur of dark shapes and shadows. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as if the very trees were alive, urging him deeper into the woods. He could feel something behind him, something unseen but terrifyingly close. His only thought was to escape, to outrun whatever was chasing him. But no matter how far he went, the forest seemed endless, the path twisting and turning back on itself. Suddenly, Jason burst into a small clearing, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The whispers fell silent, leaving only the sound of his ragged breathing. In the center of the clearing was an old, weathered cabin, much like the one they had explored earlier. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of fear through him, but he knew there was no other choice. He had to take shelter, even if every instinct screamed at him to stay away. He moved cautiously towards the cabin, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. Jason's flashlight flickered as he scanned the room, revealing only dust-covered furniture and old, faded photographs on the walls. But then, something caught his eye. A phone, just like the one he had found in the woods, sitting on a small table by the window. It buzzed to life as soon as he approached, the screen lighting up with a missed call from the same unknown number. His heart pounded as he reached out, the sense of dread overwhelming. As soon as Jason touched the phone, the whispers returned, louder and more frantic than before. The cabin seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in as the darkness deepened. The phone buzzed again, but this time Jason didn't answer. Instead, he turned to leave, but the door was gone, replaced by a solid wall of darkness. Panic gripped him as he realized he was trapped, the whispers growing louder, merging into a single, overwhelming voice that echoed in his mind. You're too late. She's already taken.